So taking a lesson away in terms of being able to be calm under significant pressure. I have spent a great deal of my life living outside of the United States, and I was living in Johannesburg at the time, heading up into Botswana. We'd gotten permission to go off into the Kalahari, and you needed permission from the president of Botswana to be able to do this. It was going to be fabulous. And we get to the border between South Africa and Botswana, and we get stopped, right? You got your passports, you do whatever you do. You're meant to just drive through. Except that we were told to debus. So now we're in a car, so we have to debus, figure that language out. And then we get out, and they're standing there with a bazooka and made us open all of our food, all of the canned food, all of the dried packages, everything that we were going to have in the middle of the Kalahari, and open it up while they were holding a hand-launching grenade, closer than the camera, actually. And you need to kind of be calm. They weren't very calm, but you need to kind of keep them calm so that they don't get a happy trigger. Yeah, life kind of throws different things at you. Anyway, ended up in the Kalahari, and it was spectacular, amazing. Wow. By the way, the Botswanan people are fabulous. They're wonderful. They're kind. They're genuine. Probably 100 miles from anywhere, and there was a guy walking on the road. I'm talking 100 miles in any direction. And there was this guy walking, and we're like, can we give you a lift? Right? So we sat on he's like, yeah, but I don't want to sit in the car. I want to sit in the front. So he was like our hood ornament for 200 miles. It was crazy.
Wow. So being in the business of extracting wisdom from our vast experiences, right? What do we take away from that one, Teresa? Or Larry, Buck? As you observe that?
Calm in the midst of chaos.
Because you could have been flustered by the bazooka guy, right? And instead, the paradise was just over the hill.
Just
wrong story, wrong lesson?
Right on the other side of the hill, just staying calm through it. There's a lot of chaos in life. The world doesn't happen the way we think it will when we're children.
I
think we all know this. We're all old enough, or at least we're beyond the age of 12, so we've figured this one out.
I hear long time preference is what I hear.
Ah, there we go.
There you go, long time preference.
Very long time preference, I mean, you're either going to die, or you're going to get to wherever you're going.
Yep.
And that's kind of always the case, right?
Yep.
And we all could die tomorrow, but, time preference says we probably won't. Just keep going.
Wow, upbeat.
Well, I'll say this on the perspective of.
But the other thing is that some of the stuff that we've learned and seen, it's not just in our personal capacities, but we've actually seen this whole cycle. We were around before a lot of the technology existed. We were around before the banking system that we know today is failing. We're watching the rails being changed. I mean, that's how I actually was drawn into Bitcoin somewhere around about 2015, 16. Somebody mentioned it to me. I didn't really know what it was, and it took about 15 minutes. I'm like, oh my God, this is the future of banking. They have no idea. This is new plumbing.
Yeah, I think this crowd in general is older average age than a lot of the Bitcoin events I've been to. Nashville tends to track younger, and one of the things I try and do when I'm interacting with younger Bitcoiners is explain that this is a different country than the country that Bob and Teresa and I grew up in. In the 70s, I mean, there were troubles, Vietnam War in particular, there was racial strife, there were a number of things that were wrong with the country at the time. But one of the things that wasn't wrong with the country is there was a middle class, a big, broad middle class, and there weren't oligarchs. And, the guy who ran Ford Motor lived down the street from us, and he made a few times more than my dad made. And, there was a lot more fairness, and in the words of George Herbert Walker Bush, I don't particularly like, but, you say it was a kinder and gentler time. And to people who were born in the 80s, 90s, whatever, I was born in 57, younger people, I don't think they can see and understand they don't appreciate what it was like. And so I wrote the book I wrote in large part because I have that history, I have that experience, and I wanted to show how it was better back then, and then all the steps, just the little, and each one was incremental and didn't necessarily seem big at the time. But like an airplane, you get a couple of degrees off course, and pretty soon you're not going anywhere close to where you think you're going, because you just keep drifting away, right? And so, we get rid of the gold standard in 71, and then they, and before that, they, or 2008 comes, or 2000 comes, they get rid of Glass-Steagall, and then 2008 comes. I mean, it's just each one compounds, which is why we're all here today, because this thing is so fucking ridiculously broken that we're pissed off and we got to fix it, right?
Yes.
I'll say it's interesting. We've drifted into the topic of time. Bitcoiners are low time preference people. You kind of have to be. But what I've learned, I'm 60 now, is time definitely is relative, and it does go so amazingly fast. So I've, for the most part, I think, lived a very low time preference life, and I think to a great degree that's let life seem a lot easier, and it's actually gone very quickly. That you don't, when you take that high time preference mindset, you, I think, remove a lot of life's obstacles that make life seem hard and make life seem slow. So in other words, there's a positive feedback loop of having a low time preference, and there's a negative feedback loop of having a high time preference. And when I look at society as a whole, too, for those of you who don't know, my background was in the personal computer industry. And I was a part of the very, very early days of the personal computer industry. And I recently told this story. So in 1986, I was on a team developing the world's first laptop. And at that time, obviously it was...
The very first laptop?
Yes.
The very first one to market, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
First fully functional IBM PC compatible laptop. So what's amazing about that to me is what I saw over, let's say, a 15-year period from that day in 1986, and then you look at the year 2000, and how we went from nobody had a laptop in the world to when I would get on airplanes in the year 2000, there would be dozens of people opening their laptop up, meaning we had gone from even nobody really having PCs in 1986 to them one entering every home, one entering every classroom, then one for every person in the home. And in 15 years, I think Larry kind of referred to this, all these small steps, suddenly the entire society had transformed. And I'm biased, obviously, because of my history, but I look at that as really a seminal moment in the history of mankind, was the personal computer. That we don't have an internet without a personal computer. If you don't have hundreds of millions of computers, there's nothing to connect and create the internet. And if you don't do that, you don't have Bitcoin. But in the professional life of one person, I've been able, in my mind, to live through three massive transformations, and really not that much time has gone by. I'm sure these guys can say the same thing. Like, you just can't believe how fast it is. I can't believe I'm 60 years old. And how did that happen? So anyway, to the degree you're exhibiting low time preference behavior, if you do have those moments when it feels like, when is it going to happen?
Hey, Bob.
Don't worry.
Forgive me, but does everyone know the distinction between low time preference and longer time preference? Is that an obvious type of thing? Do we want a quick little nutshell version, a Cliff Note version of what the distinctions are? Anybody care to share that one? I'm not sure I know all the time. I need to be reminded of it.
Low time preference means, in simple terms, you're willing to wait. You'll sacrifice today for a greater good in the future.
So and no cookie for you then, right? You get to wait?
Yeah, and high time preference means I want it now.
And the theory that's so important behind this, and this is in the book I'm writing coming out, is that it's savings, which then lead to investment, which then lead to productivity and efficiency enhancements, which make the world a better place. And so it actually goes all the way back to the biblical times, and the initial way of expressing time preferences: you don't eat your seed corn. You don't consume everything today, because guess what? You'll be screwed in the future. And in fact, the more you save, the more corn you can plant. And so you get a bigger harvest every year and you get natural growth. Keynesians don't understand this because they're fucking morons. Okay. And that's why the system is so broken, because they blackmailed, or they've, basically hijacked it, fooled the entire economics profession into thinking that, they've got to spend, borrow, borrow to generate growth. And it's not about growth, people. It's about productivity and efficiency. And that's what long time preference is. You're willing to sacrifice something today to make an investment that'll make your kids' lives better, which, by the way, is why John Maynard Keynes was an evil piece of shit. He said, in the long run, we're all dead. That's like saying, I'm going to screw my kids, and he didn't have any kids, which fits, right? He was a Fabian socialist. So
Rumors he liked them in a different way.
yeah, well, there's that too. And I don't go there because my wife says be careful. But anyway, long story short, time preference is all about making the world for our kids better, and it's actually fundamental, and it's a moral issue.
It really is. And is it something that you develop over the arc of our lives in a way, or because it almost seems inherent that an adolescent or a youth would have that really the high time thing. I can only do the things that go after the things that are really immediate and right in front of me, and then it takes a little bit.
Well, I think you have to be taught it. I mean, I think all of us as
It needs to be
parents-
taught. It doesn't just.
Well, I mean, you
evolve
can acquire it through the school of hard knocks, and
Sure.
people do, but it's a hell of a lot better if your parents teach you it from the beginning. And
But to be fair, with age, it does, you get more philosophical about it, you understand it. I mean, I'm in my 20s,
Yeah,
my time preference wasn't particularly high,
Right.
right? I mean, I was thinking about the next beer or the next skirt. I mean,
Dude. Oh, that's right. Teresa, you recognize some of this? Excuse me. Yes?
In terms of time preference?
Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
thing that you feel that.
Or the fact that I'm wearing a skirt. I don't know.
Touche. That was fantastic. Do you recognize it in your life as well? It's something that has unfolded for you as a clear distinction. Like, I get the difference between that and maybe the way I'll speak for myself, the way I was when I was younger, impulsive, crazy.
Could have been. I think perhaps one of the reasons why I mentioned that weird experience I had in Botswana is that I was very young. I was 21 years old. That was kind of a big lesson in controlling and recognizing that. So it was a different type of time preference. I needed to get there. We were going to miss the gate. There were all sorts of things, but it's like, you take the time you over time you do get the knocks, but the time preference for getting there is like, I'm gonna sit here and talk to these military guys. We were laughing at the end of that time, by the way.
I bet.
But you see it over time. You see rotations and circularity in life. I've had some unfortunate health type of effects. So I was like no seed oil, all sorts of stuff, like in the mid 90s. At which time I actually, had a Shiba Inu as well. So I'm like way ahead of these guys, right? But I didn't know it until I actually found Bitcoin. And what I saw, and this is part of the circularity, was my background was in merchant banking, investment banking, TradFi, and I was involved in some of the beginning work that was done in the early mid 80s that led to what we now call finance bros, right? But the type of finance that we have, the Wall Street type of stuff that we have now, didn't really exist in the format that it is back in the early mid 80s. That actually came about because of computers. And before that, some of the stuff that we were doing was literally almost by hand and having to like code in Cobalt and do punch cards. But it rolls right around in some of these financial products that we were creating in those days that became the foundation for what is some of the interesting products in finance today, but we're actually seeing that happen. And in the rewrite with Bitcoin coming in and being money, is that there are some good things that we need to have come out so that we can make the financial system more efficient. It's strong. We need to keep it within the Bitcoin ethos, but we also need to recognize that we need that certain participants need to be able to hedge. So we need to be able to develop these types of products that fit within Bitcoin and within the ethos. So from a time preference point of view, I've actually gone from a beginning of a career to full circle, being able to see we get to do it over. We get to do it over. So let's do it right. And that's where it's nice to be able to bring some of this experience and some of these knowledge of where it went wrong, like those little incremental changes that went in the wrong direction, and help the future for when I'm not here, but it actually continues to grow exponentially in a good way. So we've got more seed corn.
I love it. Wow. Well, let's see. Speaking of seed corn, let me throw it out to a few questions out there. Does anybody have any particular questions you'd like to share with our group? Yes.
Yeah. Wouldn't you say that one way now is much better than the 70s, 2010?
Yeah, you pointed, yeah, I've said this many, many times. I mean, if your dad was getting Ron Paul's letters, I can relate. We were a lonely crowd. There weren't many people who knew what the Austrians were, until Safe wrote his book. Safe's book really changed the world, and because I've got these 20 and 30-year-olds coming up to me and quoting von Mises, and I'm like, oh God, thank God, fucking reinforcements have arrived. You know what I mean? Yes. I'm 67 years old. I've been getting the shit kicked out of me for 40 years. I'm a gold bug. I mean, they've manipulated the crap out of it. There's no way we can ever win. And now, as one of my friends said, I mean, we got these villagers with spears and pitchforks, and, we're going to storm the Fiat Castle and kill these motherfuckers. I mean, yeah. I mean, and it was, when it happened, I was just like, wow, this is really different. You know what I mean? So it was very pleasing for me to see something I'd been interested in for 30 years go from being just a fringe issue where I was a total nut job to, oh my God, the money's broken and we got to fix it, right? And so, I mean, like the guys like Jack Mallers, I mean, the kid is just fabulous, right? I mean, and the energy, this is going to be a hero generation, right? They're going to, this fiat is going to fail, and somebody's going to have to rebuild it, and it's going to be that generation that's going to rebuild it. And they're great. They're just absolutely great. So, yeah, I completely relate to what you're talking about.
Our time to shine, right? We put in the reps, the laps. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how disappointed I am to see that. I mean, I don't like all politicians in general. I mean, the only one I've ever liked is Ron Paul. But I was glad to see Trump win over the alternative because it's a much better alternative. I think Trump coin's a bad thing. I mean, some people have said maybe he'll do something good with it. Perhaps he will. I kind of doubt it, but who knows? It's an interesting, the marriage between between crypto and Bitcoin is an interesting one, okay? I generally tend to refer to everything that's crypto that's not Bitcoin as a shitcoin, okay? However, I do recognize there may be use cases that will develop, maybe a layer 2 will come through all that. I don't know, I'm open-minded to it, but we saw so much shitcoinery with, Sam Bankman-Fried and, so many of these different projects that failed. But, it's a funny marriage because we wouldn't have a crypto president, we wouldn't have gotten where we've gotten. Bitcoiners couldn't have done what the crypto crowd joined us to help do. So in a funny way, I try to keep an open mind about letting the crypto guys play. I mean, freedom in this area is an important thing. And, if they want to mess around with meme coins and NFTs and useless projects, just like people are allowed to go gamble in Las Vegas, let's let them do it. Now, would I ever advise you to invest in any of that shit? No. And do I think it's kind of bad that the president, as one of his first acts, comes along and creates his own shit coin and pumps the shit out of it? I mean, especially if it turns out that he dumps it. I mean, good God, right? I mean, that's not what I signed up for, but, it's with politics, you take the good with the bad, right? I mean, you got to admit, it'd be nice to have somebody, it'd be nice to not have Elizabeth Warren setting crypto policy in the United States, right?
Yes,
I mean, we know that. And we got that, right? I mean, so unfortunately, we got this bad shit that comes along with it, right? Not that I can see, and I think I think in the long term, it'll just be a footnote to history. It'll fail and go away, and Bitcoin will just keep on going. You know.
And I think the best thing we can do is continue to preach this mantra of separation. Like we have to resist the blending of the two. The
Yes.
Bitcoin is not
Yeah,
crypto.
Yes.
yeah, Bitcoin, not crypto. I mean, I say that over and over and over again, and I have so many friends who say, you know, how can you invest in that stuff? There's fart coin, there's this. I mean, I get it, right? I mean, it is all bullshit. And the argument I always make is, look, imagine you got all these fake things, and then you've got one real technical innovation. Don't let the fake things throw you off the scent of the real thing.
Well, they're benefiting from the work being done by Bitcoin. The core.
Yeah, or the excitement generated on Bitcoin, $100,000.
That's
They're
right.
riding
Yeah,
its
you got-
coattail. Yeah.
Right in the wave. Yes, sir.
No, I do not believe that the people who are advising him have the right mindset. And, you know, to be real blunt about it, even those within, quote unquote, the Bitcoin community are not people that perceive this, that understand it well, or even that care about it. So it is a concern, and I think, you know, we do have to find a way.
I mean, you look at a Fred Thiel, for example. I don't think he's really too concerned about it.
No, we don't have
He's on the other side of it.
the CEOs of the big pubcos, you know, and I've, speaking for me personally, and Larry's probably been a similar position, you know, I've gotten quote unquote invites to a lot of things, but the invite is pay 1 Bitcoin, pay 2 Bitcoins, and you can come to the meeting. And that's what's really happening, honestly, behind the scenes. The crypto ball, I had an invite to the crypto ball last night, but it was, you know, pay a bunch of money and then you go to the crypto ball. I'm not saying Fred necessarily specifically, but people like Fred that have big public companies, they pay that money, and they go to those events, and you'll find, I don't want to criticize specific people, but I will make a general statement. There's a shocking lack of understanding of Bitcoin within the CEOs and the leadership within the Bitcoin community. A shocking lack. Well, I expect that to happen. I expect almost every country in the world to create their own pool. And that I gave an example earlier, if you were listening, about Bolivia, right? And so what I would do, even more specifically, if I was the president of Bolivia, is I would say, come one, come all, miners, come on. And I'll give you really low energy costs, tax-free, bring your hash rate. The only caveat is the people that do that must use the Bolivia pool. And that's how I would gain control of hash rate in my country. And and so you know, that's how I would do it, and I think that will happen. I'm sure we'll see that in the game theory, and then we'll start seeing certain blocks specifically censoring out, for instance, like OFAC compliant stuff. I'm sure it will happen. And that's why we have to have some percentage of the hash rate and some percentage of the block template creation that doesn't do that stuff, so that at least some of it gets through.
Yeah, from what I know, I don't think there's any chance of any of that being successful at this stage. I think the miners, I think everybody who's in it now understands just how important the 21 million is. I think the block size cannot change and won't change. I just don't think they could get a consensus. And so, and the whole thesis that BlackRock's going to try and split it and take it in a different direction, I don't buy it. I mean, and if they do, I don't think it'll succeed. I think that it's reached such a critical mass that you can't mess it up. Yeah, I think you've reached that. What do you think, Bob?
Well,
The one sending us a
it just
message.
doesn't want me to answer this question. So, we do need that. Those activations will come through blocks. There are some problems. There's a time stamp issue that has to get resolved that ultimately probably requires a hard fork. We'll see if somebody comes up with something, but there will eventually be a hard fork that has to happen. That doesn't mean the supply schedule changes or the issuance schedule or the block size. I do think we will see another block size war at some point because of what if you heard me talk earlier about scarcity, that as block space starts getting really, really expensive, there'll be a group of people who say, well, I don't like that, please make it cheaper, and that's the logical way to make it cheaper, kind of the quote-unquote easy way to make it cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah, how much Bitcoin would the U.S. have to be able to print a fiat, like a U.S. digital dollar, to go to a Bitcoin standard like we used to have a gold standard? Larry, you probably know how much gold we had to have.
Yeah, it's,
And if you did that, would that take all those transactions of using dollars off the blockchain, so there wouldn't be any fees? And you don't need a bigger,
well,
especially if people don't ever move Bitcoin.
yeah, it's not a matter of how much Bitcoin they would need to hold. It's what Bitcoin price would support the entire value structure. I mean, it's 21, it's infinity divided by 21 million, right? So it's not how many Bitcoin would they have to hold. And obviously, there's absolutely no way that at a base layer, the transactions can be done, I mean, not even close, right? So there's going to have to, a layer 2 is going to have to emerge that treks back to the layer 1, supported by the layer 1. There's going to be honest proof of stake kind of stuff or proof of work kind of stuff. And, Bitcoin price will have to be well north of $10 million a coin, well north. I mean, there's $900 trillion. I mean, right now, Bitcoin is 0.2% of all global assets, global investment assets. Jesse Meyer has a great chart on this. He's on Twitter. There's $900 trillion of global investment assets. That's including real estate, 450 in real estate, 450 in everything else. Bitcoin's 2 trillion. So 2 on 900 is 0.2. So Bitcoin could go to $1 million a share. It would still only be 2% of all global assets. And this is the best form of money ever created. So I think it's going to be more than 2% of all global assets, right? It could be 10%. So that would be, 5 times $1 million. So that'd be 5 million a coin, right? And then if it literally becomes all forms of money, I mean, this is how Saylor gets to his 13. He's not kidding. I mean, it's going there, assuming that the adoption continues as it has, and I don't see anything that's going to interrupt it. So the numbers will just be so much higher.
Incredible. So, are there a few other boomers out here in the audience, perhaps? Are you willing to self-identify without being a crowd? I know there's a few. I know a few of you. Trevor, you're almost there. You'll be here soon.
One day.
One day soon. Yep. All right. Well, it's certainly I feel that it's so wonderful that I guess that this is happening in our lifetime. I feel that kind of perspective, having that long arc kind of view, considering the way that I came up with a great benefits and many blessings, but now this suddenly seems like such a new chapter.
Completely. I mean, I just want to see it happen before I check out. Yeah, go ahead, Becky.
What I tell people my time scale is 300 to 500 years.
Incredible. No, seriously, incredible.
Yeah.
It's amazing to have the feeling of being able to see it. Like a lot of the technology or advancements or changes that were taking place in the 70s and 80s, they were incremental. You didn't really see them. This is way more than incremental. You can see it.
Yeah,
you can see it, and I know that just to be even part of helping it get there and knowing it's going to be hundreds of years gone and would just be dust.
The pace of change has really accelerated. I mean, it's AI and everything that's going on. It really is rather stunning. I mean, a good example of this is in 2018, Elon was saying, "I'm going to have self-driving cars. You're going to be able to buy one, turn it into a taxi." I got in Elon's car. It had that feature. It was a piece of shit. It didn't work. It did not work. I thought to myself, you know what? This thing is never going to work, right? This is 10 or 15 years out. The other day, I was home back up north. I was with my brother-in-law. We were in Wellesley, and he got in his brand new Tesla, and he said, drive us to Harvard Business School. This thing drove us to Harvard. He did not touch the wheel once. It merged in and out of traffic. It changed lanes. It stopped. It did the whole goddamn thing perfectly. Wow. And I was just like, I was blown away. I was like, oh my God, this stuff is coming so fast. Yeah. I mean, you see the robots and what they're doing with the robots in terms of harvesting things. I mean, it's just, it's going to happen. The next 10 years, or next 10, 20 years are going to blow our minds, I think.
And you'll see the places that the adoption, because there's two sides to it. There's one is the speed with which the technology advances, and the second is the speed with which it's adopted. And the world's very different than it used to be. In fact, in my lifetime, it changed. I talked about my background in the PC market. Well, in the 80s and the mid-90s, through the mid-90s, in that whole era, technological adoption was always led in the U.S., both the innovation and the leading, both adoption and the technology itself were led from the West, from the U.S. By the early 2000s, that had already changed. And in my job, I was at the chief technical officer at Gateway. I had to literally change where I went to observe society, because part of my job as a technologist was to say, how is society going to adopt technology? And what I found is I found myself in the early two places, in places like Korea, studying what was happening in the Korean market, because they had deployed broadband to the home faster than anybody else, and it dramatically changed their society. In the early 2000s in Korea, they already had TV stations dedicated to computer gaming, and the biggest celebrity gamers in Korea were on par with Michael Jordan. They couldn't walk down the street. They were making millions of dollars a year. Same time frame, I went to the Philippines, and I spent a considerable amount of time in the Philippines. And part of the reason was we were studying texting, and at the time, in the U.S., the average person was doing one text per day. It's like year 2000. The average Filipino was doing 22. So the reason I'm giving you these examples is that I think with Bitcoin, what we're going to find is that just like Bitcoin Beach kind of came up and we have these different pockets, we will, in adoption, I don't think we're going to lead. And I think hyper-Bitcoinization will occur from the second and third world faster. They will leapfrog us. We have something that's pretty good on a relative basis. They have shit. And so as they get comfortable with it, I think they will adopt very, very quickly. And by the way, there's a lot of those people. Of the 8 billion people in the world, we've got like 6 billion living in those kind of places. So I'm much more optimistic about the pace of hyper-Bitcoinization, but I am equally optimistic about how long Bitcoin can make the world a great place. And I said it earlier today, I think Bitcoin is money for the next 1,000 years, and we probably will need something new at that time, but we'll let those people figure it out.
Yes. If I may, speaking of optimism, everybody get a look at that book cover right there? Everybody recognize that? That's right. I think they had to make a whole new category in Barnes & Noble for this book.
No, it's not out yet. You can buy it on Kindle, but it will be released within 2 weeks, I think. Perhaps a tad longer. Yeah, it's written, it's being laid out. I'm trying to make it look nice on the inside, and so, but I'll be on Twitter, and when it comes out, I'll announce it. Obviously, you can support it, that'd be great. What it is, I think what you'll find when you read it, it's a really good tool for orange pilling a normie. I tried to write it at a level that you didn't have to know anything about finance. In fact, it probably would be better if you're just a working class person and all you knew is you're getting screwed by inflation. And because that's pretty widely known. And so, pick up this book, read it. The first part is the problem, how the system changed and evolved to screw you completely. And then the second part is the obvious solution that we all know. And it's written in very easily to understand terms, and I ran it by people with no financial background, which led me to then put in a lot of footnotes and a lot of explanation. So for some of you, you'll read it and go, I know this already. But I think the way it's, there's evidence to support what I say, and some parts get very analytical, but in general, it's written so that anyone could understand it.
I was fortunate to read some of the early drafts. It's excellent. I think you guys will all enjoy it. Like Larry said, I think it'll be a wonderful tool. And I'll say one other thing too is, this is kind of leaping way forward. My biggest concern about Bitcoin is in more the medium term, like 60, 70 years from now. And my concern is that we do hyper-Bitcoinize, Bitcoin's wildly successful, and then we have generations that start to come into the world that don't know the problem that we had to fight through and the problem we had to solve. And so Larry's book, will remain there for hopefully hundreds of years, reminding people what the problem was.
Wow. Larry, was this a kind of a first time go?
Yeah, it's the only book I've ever written. It's the only book I'm ever going to read or write. My CrossFit coach is sitting here in the audience, and he knows I've been skipping workouts to write this book, and I feel very guilty about that. But I left it all in the field. I mean, I worked my ass off on this thing, and I did it in 6 months. That's the best I can do. I can't make it any better than this. And so, I honestly, I think when you read, I think you'll agree. I've heard, Preston and a few others have said this is a really good book. I mean, Max Kaiser said that. So, I think it's the tool that we need, and it fills a need. I borrowed on Lynn and Jeff, and I took from Bitcoin Twitter. I mean, a lot of these ideas aren't original to me. But what I did was, Lynn's book's a textbook. I mean, even Safe's book is a little bit of a textbook. You give it to the average American. I've given out the Bitcoin Standard to dozens of people. I'll bet a fraction of them read it. They get into it a little ways, and they bog down. They say, fuck that, this is too confusing. I'm not going to read this. This is written more because I got my personal story in there, and I got a lot of anecdotes in there, and because I'm salty, it's more fun to read.
You?
Right? Salty? And so therefore, I think you'll see, the opening scene is pretty, truth to power kind of dramatic. And so I think people will read it and go, oh shit, this guy's crazy. I want to hear what this is all about, right? But that's what it's going to take, right? I mean, you got to get people engaged. People read stories. That's why people watch reality TV. They want to know about the personalities. They want to know who the good guys are and the bad guys are. Well, the bad guys are the central banks. That's easy. I nailed them. I just crucify the central banks in this book. My wife said, you went way too far. And I said, no, I didn't. Bernanke's going to read this book and be fucking horrified. In fact, he probably won't have the guts to read it. But if he has the guts to read it, he is going to be horrified, because I just lambaste this guy with facts. With facts and evidence and what happened. So
we should send him a copy. Huh?
Well, that's an interesting thing. I hadn't even thought about that, but maybe I will. We'll see.
Can you see even yet another project book down the road?
No,
not really.
No, it's a one and done.
Okay.
It's a one and done.
The uniquely distilled world, as Larry.
I actually felt like I was being spoken to by higher powers. It just flowed out of me. I felt like I had to do it. And I felt like I sat in a very unique position, because I'm 67. I've been in this field for 40 years. I've supported Ron Paul. I've been fighting this battle for a long goddamn time, right? And it was just like it all came together. And, to be honest with you, I've had some clashes with Bitcoiners, because one of the things that pisses me off about young Bitcoiners is they think they invented the idea of sound money. And I'm like, look, you fucking idiots. I've been fighting this battle for 40 years. You didn't invent sound money. Sound money existed before you were born, okay? And so I felt like I was in a unique position to kind of go through the history of it all and tell that story, and then tell why this is the solution. And so, it's a unique, I kind of feel like I got bottled lightning here. I don't know if any of you have been to see the Dylan biopic, And you know how when he went there, if you go watch his interviews at the time, he felt like he said, I'm just sitting on top of a rocket here. I've got the right message at the right time, in the right place, and he knew it was going to work. And that's how I feel with this book. This this is going to blow the world up. I mean, somebody, when I was thinking about writing it, a woman said to me, you know, books can change the world. And that really registered, and I thought, God, it's going to be a lot of work to do this. And then I thought, you know what, she's right. And there's nobody else writing this book. I got to fucking write this book.
Nice.
I got to do it. And so, what's that? Yeah, it is. I mean, and you know, look, it may fall on a dead crowd. I know the Bitcoiners like it. That's great. But success in this book, in my mind, is not whether you guys like it. You'll all like it. Success in this book, in my mind, is do your friends who are no-coiners like it? Do they read it? Do they recommend it? Do they say, hey, you got to read this? You know, does it get buzz? That's the key. And so, I mean, all of you can obviously help me with that. And, you know, it's surprising how little money you make when you write a book, because the publishers and everybody take all the money.
Oh, yeah.
But you don't get rich doing this. But you might change the world. And so, if for that reason, if you like it, please support it. You know, pass it on. Tell people about it. You know, let's get some buzz here. I mean, we can sell a few million of these things. We can orange pill a lot of people. It's going to make a difference in those people's lives and to all of us, really. So that's the goal.
And what's notable, yes. What's notable, too, it really is a transformation that it's pulled out of you now, having gone through this process.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I just have a sense of a higher level of conviction and vision for all of it. And I've only known you kind of briefly, intermittently.
A couple years,
yeah. And I love, say, to follow you and engage with you, say, out in the media whenever I see you. But this suddenly is like a whole new kind of thing to kind of rise out of you. And,
yeah, no, it just kind of came naturally.
It's impressive.
It just kind of came naturally. It was like, you know, somebody's got to say it, and so I did. So here we are.
He said it.
It is proof of work. I mean, it was a lot of work, but it is what it is.
Scott, you got a question back there?
Yeah, what was the catalyst 40 years ago for you at 27 years old to kind of go down this Austrian mind path? And,
yeah, so my grandfather was a gold bug, you know, bless his soul, and he thought that what Roosevelt did in '33 was a crime, you know, when he grabbed all the gold. So, you know, so I had a family background of that, and my grandmother was deeply religious. And she thought the bankers were evil, and she kind of picked up on it very early on in her life. In the book, it tells the story of them. They had a retail operation in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and you know, they got fooled by the run-up. The Roaring '20s caused them to expand their business massively and take on debt. And then when the '30s came and they almost lost their business, and they spent their all through their 30s begging the bank not to foreclose, or else they would have lost their business. They didn't. And it tells the story in the book. But when my grandmother was dying in the 80s, you know how people, when they're close to death, they sometimes come in and out of consciousness. And she kept saying over and over again, they don't have any debt. They don't have any debt. And it was deeply moving that she suffered that. And I don't know, you can see the system and how it's hurt so many people. And so that was part of what drove me.
No, I'll speak, and I really appreciate you sharing that, Larry. You can feel the passion. I've got a chance to become good friends with Larry, and you know, this, you can see it comes from his heart, it comes from his soul. And those of us that had grandparents in that era, you know, I can say, I remember my grandfather, who was a very simple man. He had about an 8th grade education and really worked in kind of physical labor. And I remember in 1971, I was 7 years old when we went off the gold standard, and how upset he was. He was furious about this. Like I said, a very simple man, but he understood what was happening, and he understood how bad it would be. And I remember, I was the oldest grandchild, and I was very close to him, and I would go do chores with him. Usually he'd pick me up on the weekend, we'd clean the garage, I'd mow the lawn, you know, whatever. He always give me money, and he always give me money say, Bobby, I want you to save this $5 or $4 or whatever it is he would give me, because you have to be the first one in this family to ever go to college. And I remember what clicked with me later on was I did what he said. hold him in the highest esteem. I was very, very close to him. And when I went to college and I started using the money, there was a certain realization that I went to school and college from 1982 to 1986. It had already devalued so much. And there was a realization that what they had stolen was the labor of my grandfather and his dream. I mean, they were eroding the dream. It took me a while. I didn't find Austrian until the early 2000s, but I had that realization, and it pissed me off, and it took me a long time to find the answer. And I was fortunate to find Austrian economics myself in the early 2000s. But, understanding, like Larry and I, our grandparents felt that. They lived it. They saw it, maybe in some ways even worse than what we've been through. I know it's hard to, I guess, compare what the 30s were like to the, recent era, but it's bad. And like I said, there's something that we all connect to, like at a really deep emotional level, because the people that we love, that loved us, that wanted a better world for us, it meant something to them too.
The system's just inherently broken and terribly unfair, and the book lays that out. And I think a lot of people feel that, but they don't know how to put their finger on what it is. And so that's what we got to educate them. We got to educate them what it is, and then we got to show them this bright, shining way of solving it, which is fantastic. I mean, once you get on the Bitcoin standard, you feel great. I feel great. I mean, we're winning. We're going to keep winning. There's going to be so much winning. Trump's not even going to, we're going to say, please, Mr. President, stop winning. No,
That's right.
I mean, this is going to work, but it was born out of pain, because the system has created a lot of pain for a lot of people. Most of the people in this room have done fine, but my sister lives in a very rural area, and she works in the grocery store. She doesn't need to, but she does because she wants to be social, and she interacts with these people every day, and it's horrible, the stories she tells me about how people are hurt and medical costs, everything. It's awful. It's absolutely awful.
Yes. Well, any more questions? I think we've got, all of us are going to be hanging out at our post-party function, correct? Hopefully you see some nods out there for you. That's right. Panda, of course, will be leading the charge over there. So any quick final send-off thoughts for us to help wrap out the afternoon here? And now you have a little send-off sentiment.
I've left it all on the table.
I know you did. I appreciate it. I'm looking at you, Teresa. You have a quick closing thought for our audience and out there in the ether that's been following us all day?
That's been following us all day. You can join us over for some drinks.
Let's go do that.
We're going to go do that. We're going to talk
okay with that?
Bitcoin. We're going to talk Austrian
All right.
economics. We're going to enjoy it tonight.
Thank you.